Hello, welcome everyone to this afternoon session on the European Seminar on Private Pensions. So we have three speakers this afternoon. So Stéphane Loisel from the University of Lyon, then Jennifer Alonso from Université Libre de Bruxelles, and Abraham Hernández-Pacheco from the University of Lisbon. And so, Stéphane, the floor is yours. Your presentation is on quick detection of changes in validity of the mortality assumptions.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank Merci Claramunt and all the organizers of this nice workshop. So I will present some joint work with Nicole El-Karoui from University of Sorbonne in Paris, Yahya Sali from University of Lyon in France, and two other researchers, Karim Barigou, who's now in Laval University in Quebec, and Patrick Loeb, who's now in UNSW in Sydney. So I will talk about a topic that's related to pensions risk management, but not directly to pensions economics. So it's about how to detect as quickly as possible that assumptions regarding mortality or longevity are no longer in accordance with the data. And of course, we don't want to put all the French population in the streets because of just noise. You want to be sure. And so this is what we are going to discuss. I mean, not the appropriateness of the current reform in France, but how to detect this from a statistical point of view. So I will start my talk by the initial motivation, then we'll have a look at the theory that we developed. Of course, as usual, we start from a very concrete problem, and then we modify the problem so that it fits something that we can try to solve theoretically. But then we come back to the initial problem, and we're going to look at concrete applications. So the initial story in France, here you can see a graph that looks like the capacity in the Lee-Carter model. So the x-axis corresponds to time, and on the y-axis it's something like the capacity. So it's a time series that describes the time evolution of log mortality rates over time. And if this time series is decreasing, this means that mortality rates are decreasing, which means that longevity is improving. And of course, if this time series starts to decrease faster, then we have larger improvements than expected, and then this is where longevity risk materializes, the awful risks that people live longer than expected. And so in France, of course, this is not the exact data because the data is proprietary, but there was a change during the 1970s. And I will denote here this change point instant by theta. And when the first prospective life tables were built by former students from University of Strasbourg in 1993, then the whole history of mortality rates was taken into account back up to the end of the Second World War. And what happened is that this change, so these faster improvements, continued after 93. And when the prospective life tables were renewed by the French Institute of Actuaries in 2005-2006, the TPRV 93 life tables were replaced with TGH and TGF 05 life tables, which stands for tables by generation, men and women. And then we had to increase the reserves of the French life insurance market by 8%, which is quite significant. So this was our initial motivation. Could we do better? Could we react faster, given that we can't observe this time series continuously, simply because each time to produce these tables, you have to get the agreement of 20 plus companies and make sure that they accept to put all of their data together and that some independent group of experts look at this data. And it's not a continuous time process, because you see that it's not been done again since 2005, even if we suspect deviations. So could we do better? But of course, without too many false alarms. This would be better because we would achieve better fairness between different generations. And when looking at this problem, this made us think of classical sequential testing problems that were present during the Cold War between, let's say, the Russians and the West. And so here this can look like a Russian radar. You can see a kind of Brownian motion with zero drift. And if the US were to send a nuclear rocket to Russia at time theta, then this signal would change into a Brownian motion with a positive drift, which is assumed to be known and to be equal to mu, positive. This is, of course, a very strict assumption. And the problem that Kolmogorov's former students and in particular Shirayev on the east side and their peers on the western side tackled was to find the optimal stopping time tau that would minimize the elapsed time between theta and tau, of course penalizing by the false alarm probability, the probability that you detect something at time tau before it really occurs at time theta, because you don't want to trigger a nuclear war because of an excursion of the Brownian motion that goes a little bit higher than usual. And here on this slide, you can see a picture of Mr. Petrov, who was in charge of monitoring the Russian radars and observed such a signal and decided not to report this signal during the Cold War. And if he had reported, maybe we wouldn't be here, because it's very likely that a nuclear war would have started. So you can read about his story if you're interested. So, of course, my talk is about the applied probability topics, but then it would be also very relevant to discuss about the behavioral economics aspects and the fact that you have to interpret these weak signals and these risk indicators. And of course, it's much easier to do that long after the event than before. And in particular, coming back to the previous slide, it's easy now to say, oh, this was a mistake to have such a long estimation period, but nothing prevented at that point the trend from changing back again to the initial trend. So that's a question that must be also kept in mind. So in terms of previous works, there are two cases. The first case deals with a continuous time process, so the Brownian framework, and the second chapter corresponds to the Poisson framework when you want to count some events. So here, what we're interested in today corresponds to the second case, because we want to count number of deaths or number of claims in P&C insurance if we want to extend this framework. And when we looked at that time, there were several results of optimality in the so-called Bayesian setting. So when you have a prior distribution, prior assumption on theta, and we wanted to tackle a more robust point of view because what you get really depends a lot on the prior distribution that you put in this Bayesian setting. So to summarize the mathematical framework, you can directly have a look at the formula on the bottom of the slide. So we very often, and this was the case for the French prospective life tables, even if you put together 20 insurance portfolios, you don't have enough individuals and enough deaths to build directly a prospective life table. So you need to use a reference life table, which is very often the national population reference. So this corresponds to this mortality intensity lambda T naught. And you see that, as usual, you've got a multiplier in front of that. That's rho underline. That accounts for the fact that policyholders are usually wealthier than the average, and very often they have lower mortality rates. And at time theta, this multiplier rho underline becomes rho bar. So we have this abrupt change. Of course, this is an exaggeration because it could be a gradual change, but in this setting, we look at an abrupt change. And so there are two cases, whether we look at mortality risk or longevity risk. Here I'm going to present the result for mortality risk, so I'm going to assume that rho bar is larger than the previous value, and I'm going to assume that this previous value is 1 without loss of generality. So some important notation will denote by p theta and e theta the probability measure and the expectation when the change occurs exactly at time theta. And there are, in fact, two important cases. Theta equals 0. This corresponds to the fact that the change occurs immediately. So this corresponds basically to the new model. And theta equals plus infinity. This means that the change never occurs, so it corresponds to the old model. And so we're always going to compare, as time goes by, the respective likelihood of the first one with respect to the other one. And our criterion is not exactly the detection delay. It's the conditional expectation of the number of deaths between the time of change and the detection time. And we want this frequency of false alarm here to be, when it's written like that, to be large enough. So we want the average number of deaths up to false alarm when nothing changes to be large enough. And the optimization problem is formalized as a minimax problem. So you look for the optimal stopping time that's going to enable you to react fast enough. But first of all, this corresponds to the two elements in red. You let nature play optimally against you. So you let nature choose the outcome small omega against you with the essential supremum. And you let also nature choose the time at which the change occurs, which corresponds to the supremum over theta. And of course, you want this false alarm constraint with this parameter W on the second line. Only two assumptions. The first one is very reasonable. It means that the number of deaths on average on every finite interval is finite, almost surely under the two probability measures. And the second one means that we're in an open portfolio, because if you had a closed portfolio with, let's say, 1 million people, N infinity would be 1 million, because they all die at some point. To be infinity, this means that you have new entrants as time goes by. And the key tool is the so-called radon-Nicodim density of P0 associated to the new model with respect to P infinity associated to the old model. And if you look at the formula below, you see that the logarithm of this radon-Nicodim density corresponds to so-called dual risk process, because you've got some upward jumps when log of rho is positive, and you've got a negative drift when rho is larger than 1 minus rho is negative. And we must somehow forget the past in some optimal way, and what we have shown with Nicole and Yaya a few years ago is that the optimal strategy consists in pounding the alarm when, at the first time, tau m, when the reflected version of this u of t overshoots a certain level m. And graphically, here you can see that even if the formalism, the mathematical formulation is a bit complex, graphically it's very easy for decision makers to interpret this graph. So on the left-hand side, you've got a simulation where at time 3, the number of deaths per unit of time is increased by 50%. So the black process corresponds to the cumulative number of deaths. You see some acceleration. And in red, this is the Kusum, the renormalized Kusum process. So you see that it jumps upwards by 1. It goes down at a certain pace. And there is some reflection at position 0, because we don't let this process go below 0. And before the change, there are few jumps, so few deaths, so the slope is strong enough to put back the process close to 0 with a high probability. But after the change, there are too many upward jumps, and the process, the red process, starts to escape towards infinity. So it makes sense to determine some horizontal threshold m and to pound the alarm at the first time where this process overshoots this level. So we can discuss during the Q&A session, if you're interested, the way to set up the two main parameters, which is basically the slope here and this level m of the threshold. On the right-hand side, this is more relevant for longevity risk. This time, we have a 50% decrease of mortality intensity at time 3. You can see that the black process slows down, and the red process has now downward jumps and some uprising slope. And before the change, there are enough downward jumps to keep the red process close to 0. But after mortality rates decreases at time 3, there are no longer enough deaths to keep this red process down, and it starts to escape to plus infinity. So of course here, this corresponds to a case where you get a 50% change, so you don't need all this machinery to detect that. But it's more relevant when there is, let's say, a 5 or 10% change in mortality rates. A few operational challenges that we face. Here you can see on this graph different log mortality rates by age for different calendar years for French males. So the yellow and green curves correspond to the first half of the 19th century, and the pink and red curve correspond to the end of the 20th century. And of course, you can notice the usual shapes. You can notice the effect of world wars and Spanish flu. But also, you can see on the top right-hand corner that there is some inversion at some point. So even if there is a decrease in mortality rates up to ages like 80 or 90, after some point, there is some inversion. Because basically at the end you've got to die from something. So if you kept all the fragile persons in the population, you're going to experience higher mortality rates at older ages. And this is important because this means that you've got to differentiate age groups. You can't have one CUSUM for everything. Another technical issue is that these counting processes are so-called partly self-disexcited. You may be familiar with so-called Hawkes processes, which are stochastic processes which are self-excited, which are now very much studied for cyber risk or for some other phenomenon like credit risk as well. Here it's the opposite. You see, each time there is an upward jump in the process Vt, there is a downward jump in the process lambda t because we have one person less exposed. And you've got also some small increase of lambda t over time because of aging, and you've got some upward jumps in lambda t each time there is a new entrant. So of course, usually if you've got millions of persons, you don't really care. If you're focused on, let's say, estimating averages, you don't care. But if you have smaller groups and if you want to differentiate a change from noise, you need to be very careful with these specificities. And here, this is an example where, starting from the baseline assumption, which is the red log mortality curve as a function of age, we look at two cases. The first one is the green curve, which would be maybe what you would have in mind in terms of longevity risk materializing. In that case, there is a universal decrease by 10% of log mortality rates, or something else that could occur, which would be the blue curve, in which case you have a larger decrease for ages up to 85, but after 85 you got an increase to compensate. So here the truth would be maybe to do that after the age 90 or 95, but this is just for the illustration. And here is what you get in terms of key risk indicators that you could define from CUSUM depending on what you do. So if you consider all the ages, this would be the red CUSUM for cumulated sums. And so you can see that the red curve starts at the very beginning to go up, but then because there is a decrease at the end, this CUSUM doesn't go up because it's just a matter of mortality rates that are shifted in time, a little bit like harvesting phenomena during heat waves, but this time over age. This is, of course, even worse if you focus with the blue CUSUM on the older population. But if you focus on the age group 35-85, then in that case, the green CUSUM is the right one and really does what you expect, so it goes up. Now, I don't know how much time I have left. 5 minutes. So we can maybe discuss how to set up this parameter rho. So rho corresponds to 5% if the new mortality rates are at the level of 95% of the previous ones. And let's say 20% if the mortality rates are at 80% of what was planned. And what you can see here is that, from my point of view, the way to set up this parameter rho is not a statistical way, because there's no way we can guess what the level will be. But from my point of view, it should be set up according to the so-called risk appetite of the pension fund or the insurance company. The risk appetite corresponds to the level of risk the organization is ready to accept to take the risk. And what I find also interesting is that we presented longevity risk and longevity risk management in a pension fund in Switzerland, and the chief financial officer was completely uninterested up to this slide. And fortunately, my colleague Yaya had prepared this column that you can see here, for example, for double improvements for males, where you can see a column named interest rate in addition to the column called pension value. And I think that for us, actuaries, demographers, pension economists, we are very much used to the notion of pension, what we call pension value in the column. This means that here, if longevity improvements are doubled, and if your portfolio is composed of males who are all aged 65 years, then this doubled improvement increase the mathematical reserves by 7%. So the sum of expected payoffs by 7%. And I thought that this was the way to study risk appetite for the pension fund. But the chief financial officer thought, okay, I'm not worried. But then the second column was about the performance that you should achieve in addition on the asset side, on the investment side, in order to compensate this loss on the technical side. So this means that if you want to compensate this 7% increase, you need to overperform on the investment by 57 basis points every year. And then the chief financial officer said, "Oh, but this is completely impossible. This is super hard, particularly with the constraints that I have. So this means that this risk is very bad. And why didn't we study it before? We must do something," and so on. And so I think it's very interesting, because before discussing risk indicators, we can see that risk perceptions, even from people with a very high level of literacy, because very often we have discussed here about the literacy of the public, but even in a pension fund with a chief financial officer, the type of glasses that you use, which can be actuarial, demographers, financial, or economists, well, the type of glasses you use will change your perception of the risk, and which means that probably we have to accept to use other people's glasses to describe risk, even if you see, I think our glasses are more relevant in that case, because longevity risk in that case, in the case of a change in the trend, is worse for age 65 than afterwards, because for several reasons, because in particular it has less time to materialize, and also because the amount is going to be smaller. while with the glasses of the chief financial officer, you see that the number of basis points increases over time, and the chief financial officers also said, yes, and we have smaller duration, so it's harder to achieve this, higher overperformance. But on the other side, it's during a smaller number of years. So it means we don't have to give up our glasses, but also to use other glasses. Now, just to finish, coming back to these different age classes, here I just have simulated data, and in this simulated data, you see that we implement a change in mortality rates for the whole age group from 60 to 90. And then we have 3 risk indicators. The one that takes all the information, this is the black one. It's, of course, the fastest one. And it's faster in particular than the blue. The blue only monitors age groups between 76 and 90. And in that case, it's interesting to differentiate those 2 age groups. Only if there are some discrepancies between what happens during different age groups. Because here, if the same occurs for the same population, it's better to use all the information. But of course, as we've seen before, if we have something that affects only one age class, then typically the black kusum here would be diluted with information. And the nice thing about, I think, this theory is that it also gives you these types of curves. And these curves tell you what you can do and what you can't do. So if you've got a decision maker or a CEO who tells you, OK, I want to detect a change within, let's say, 50 days, a change of 15%, you're going to say, OK, but then you have to accept that I'm going to make a false alarm every 100 days, which is, of course, unacceptable. And then if the person says, yes, but I don't want a false alarm more than once every 3 years, then you can follow this curve and you can tell this person, well, in that case, you have then to wait for 6 months on average so that statistically we can determine something. And I think it's also useful to educate decision makers. And to conclude, we've applied that on real-world data from 14 insurance portfolio, and we can discuss the results if you're interested in, if we have time. And it's also possible to apply these techniques to other types of insurance data, in particular claims or calls, with seasonality and with even past dependency. So I'm just going to show you one slide where you can see that we have this type of data here in orange that features some strong seasonality and where it's possible to apply the same machinery and also to use some past-dependent aspects if needed. So for technical details, the optimality proof is in the first paper. The application to call center data, it's in the second paper. And we have 2 papers that are almost finished. So when we say resubmit to NEK, this is Nicole El-Karoui, because it's before submitting it to the review, we must first get the agreement of Nicole. And so after I finish this talk, tomorrow I have some work to do to finish these papers. But so if you're interested, I can send you the 2 last ones, probably, hopefully, before the summer. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stéphane, for this very interesting presentation. I don't know if perhaps the audience...
Thank you for the presentation.
The micro.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you have the same evaluation by considering this life expectancy decrease that we observe today in many OECD countries? Maybe you could have maybe a little bit different result?
Yes, so that's right, that there are 2 different main types of approach for longevity forecasts. And if you look at James Voppel followers, you would basically use the best practice line and say, okay, we've got an affine increase in life expectancy in the leading country, and we're going to use this line to forecast future longevity improvements. And on the other hand, you have what I mentioned earlier, the Lee Carter or Cairns, Blake and Dowd and other approaches, where you focus on log mortality rates or log it of mortality rates. And in the same way, very often you find a trend with some noise, with some autoregressive patterns, but you've got your downward trend, and then you're going to use this trend to forecast future mortality rates and so future life expectancy. Already the 2 approaches disagree strongly with each other. So we have studied that with Frédéric Planchet and Edouard de Bonneuil some years ago, and we wrote a paper called Do Actuaries Believe in Longevity Deceleration? Because you can have, in fact, a deceleration even if you've got your Lee Carter approach. So I think what you mentioned is totally feasible, but of course it depends on your initial point of view. So my initial point of view would be to count the number of deaths, and then yes, you currently, if you run CUSUM on some population data, sometimes you find you detect something. But as you know, of course, currently one of the challenges is what do we do with the COVID years? It's already a problem for mortality forecasts. It's even worse for detection, because even if you can try to replace some values or to slightly mitigate the hump for forecasts, it's a bit more challenging for detection. So I think we can detect some changes, but it's a bit harder now.
Thank you, Stéphane. A very quick one. So we observe also almost everywhere the DB schemes, they do not accept new members. So
they do not accept
new members, no longer possible. So what about if your n is equal to 0?
So first of all, the easy answer is mathematical. Yeah. If you don't have anybody left in the population, then you've got a flat signal, like in the hospital. Okay. So in that case, you wait, and mathematically nothing prevents you. You're basically frozen, and nothing prevents you from to continue the signal after you've got new entries. Of course, then I think the interesting question is when the n infinity, so it's not infinity, when it's close to new entries. In that case, as you may guess, it depends on the size of the population. If you've got, let's say, millions of people, that's fine during 10, 15 years. If you've got tens of thousands, then probably it's not relevant.
Thank you, Stéphane. Just wondering if you have seen this signaling kind of research applied to, say, climate change, and try to see if there is real climate change based on the number of days that are colder or warmer or whatever?
Yes, so there were some works like that. For example, there's still a debate whether climate change is increasing or not the frequency of hurricanes or storms. We know it's widely accepted that the severity of these events is worsened by climate change because you've got more power, and so potentially you can have more severe events. But yes, some people monitor the frequency of some events in order to try to get some evidence of that. For other risks, to determine whether there will be some climate change impact, the research currently, and this is what we see in the working groups of the European Actuarial Association or International Actuarial Association, most of the stakeholders, they use physical models. And so they model the troposphere, or they model some relevant parameters. And then they apply these physical models with some RCP scenarios like RCP 8.5 or 4.6 and so on. And this is the way they assess whether it's likely that there will be a change. And so, in my opinion, here, what we did is relevant when no other information is useful. So when we are a bit agnostic and we say, okay, I just believe in the number of events that I see. But of course, if you've got some extra relevant information that can be trusted from geosciences or from physics or from climate science, then you should plug this in the approach. And this machinery can be used to test the validity of the model, because the model doesn't need to be stationary. So I think that in the future, insurance companies should look at these models with some deteriorating trends, and they should check these actuarial and climate-adjusted assumptions with incoming data. And it would be possible to do that.
Thanks so much. I think it's a very interesting debate, but unfortunately we're a little bit short of time. So perhaps we can leave some discussion for the coffee break and move to the next presenter. So let me introduce you to Jennifer Alonso, who will talk about second pillar in Belgium, current issues and challenges. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Merci, and well, everyone who's organized this, it's a great opportunity to meet the people thinking probably the same things and knowing about the different countries in Europe. So I will be talking about Belgium, and in terms of the things that I'm going to say, yes. Oh, there seems to be some accents that have disappeared in my name, and well, I hope that the graphs are looking good. In any case, if you want to have the presentation, feel free to contact me, and I can send you the one without odd things coming up. So yesterday we already talked about Belgium, and we talked on a more general basis what the challenges are for the first, second, and third pillar. And today I'm going to talk in much more detail about three main issues that we have. Of course, these are not the only issues that we have, but in terms of just a very quick recall of the things that we know from yesterday is that we have a first pillar with a lot of problems in the sense that we need a serious reform, but as in many other countries, there is a political will political will is missing in order to do that. We have a coalition government with all parties which are involved. It's difficult to get any kind of advance towards a more sustainable system. And if we then look at the second pillar in the hopes to really supplement first pillar, we see at first the big numbers. It seems that we have high coverage. A lot of people seem to have a pension plan in the second pillar, but then if we are going to look into more detail, we see that the contributions rates are low, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a second. Now, based on that, of course, it's good to be acquainted with the system, but it's even better to have a proper system that pays pensions which are decent, that actually increase the overall replacement rate. But then in all these contexts, we also have the whole fiscal incentives and the whole tax issue around that. Because of course we want people to contribute into pension funds. We want people eventually to also purchase insurance products or anything that might protect them in the old age. But then how do we make people do that? We do that by giving them tax credits. So because otherwise they might think, well, I'd rather invest in this other product that gives me better return, for which I don't have to pay any taxes. So there's always this kind of tax optimization that is happening in the background. Now, of course, if we incentivize, people enter the plans, but that has a cost for the government. So we will be saying how much is the cost for the government, and how much is the cost for whom? Because of course there might be some kind of redistribution from high earners to low earners, because pension plans typically are more represented in the high earner space. But then the question arises, when we're looking at the first and the second pillar together, is it still the case that we have this redistribution? And we will be talking about that as well a few times today. And yesterday we've talked about capping contributions or capping pensions, and we will see that for Belgium actually, we're capping the benefits, but we're not capping the contributions, and that makes that on the first pillar there's some kind of implicit tax for high earners, which is kind of compensated by the tax advantage that is given on the second pillar. We will see the actual numbers. Now, of course, we're talking about pensions, and when we think about pensions, we think about a regular payment, a regular stream of payments. But we've seen that for the case of Belgium, we have 99% of benefits which are paid on a lump sum basis. Now, how can we move towards paying more annuities? Another question is, well, do we want to move towards paying more annuities given other challenges that might arise? Those are also things that I'm going to kind of briefly talk about, such that hopefully there's some kind of discussion, some kind of debate, either in the question or later during the coffee break, because I would be interested in hearing what your thoughts are about that. Now, coverage seems large. So if we're looking at the numbers, we see that 70% of the active population has a second pillar. So you would think, well, that's already really good if I compare that to, say, my country. or other countries. And then, of course, then you need to see, okay, you have a second pillar. Does that mean that you first actively contribute to that pillar? Because you might have worked 5 years in a particular company, have a pension fund there, but since then never contributed elsewhere. Or you might have one, you fully participate, but you have like 200 euros at the end of the contribution period. Is that very material? Actually not. So if we're looking at the actual numbers and we're looking at this graph in front of you, we see 4 circles. And then we see that there's 3 colors. And basically what we're seeing is that roughly, for the first 2 ones, half of the people who have a pension fund are actively participating to it. So there's a lot of passive reserves. You've contributed in the past, you still have the right, but you're not increasing that pension fund through new contributions. So we see already that from a seemingly very high coverage, in practice, it's not like it's super dynamic and there's a lot of new contributions for most of the people. So seeing that, the Belgian government decided to do various reforms on the second pillar. Namely, they thought, well, first of all, we need to avoid discrimination between different statuses within the same company or sector. Because that's what we call the difference between the blue and white collar employees. In the past, they could have like a pension plan for people who have a master's degrees and more, and people who would be just doing other jobs in the company. They would have different pension plans, or they wouldn't have, like one would have a pension plan, the other one wouldn't. And now one thing that needs to be done is to make sure that within the same company, everyone has access to the pension plan which is the best one, right? So avoiding discrimination within the sector, within the company. That's a first thing that the Belgian government decided. In that sense, that would already increase the active coverage by having more people entering the pension fund in case they weren't in the pension fund, and eventually increasing the contribution rate in the event that, for instance, for the blue-collar one would be lower. So that would be a way to kind of increase participation into the system. Now, apart from that, the government decided to extend the second pillar to everyone, and also implementing a minimum contribution rate of 3%. We have heard already that 3% might not be enough, but already when you're going to see the numbers, 3% would already be a huge cost for some companies because of the back service, which is related to passing from 1% to 3% for a particular number of years. That could yield to a very big cost for the companies because, of course, mostly is the companies financing these pension funds. Now, if we look at the numbers as well, if we look at the numbers as well, then we have that actually the average is already attained. We already have more than 3% contribution rate. So then you would think, why does the government put such a low ambition of 3% when we are already on average contributing more than 3%, and we're actually contributing 3.5%. The thing is that actually when you look then at the distribution, because of course we typically report things on averages, but we know that averages hide a lot of things. Actually, when you're looking at the actual distribution, we have that half the members contribute less than 2%, and the richer ones, the highest 20 percentile, contribute 100 times more on nominal terms. So you will see in the next slide the actual distribution. There's people contributing 30, 20, 10%, very few people, but there are, and most of them are actually concentrated around 1 and 2. So this 3% makes it a big back service to be financed. Now, also in terms of participation, on average 74%, in practice, higher participation in high earners, 87% versus low earners, 33%. Now, so if we put everything together, we can say that around 3/4 of the employees contribute less than 3%, which is the ambition of the government. because they either do not contribute at all, that's 36%, or they contribute less than 3%. Now, first step, if we want to move towards that 3%, is that we need to put money aside. And how much money are we talking about this back service? We are talking about 1.56 billion that need to be put into the system just to attain the 3%. So if you're now asking me what are the ambitions to go towards 8%, I don't want to do the calculations because already going to 3%, it's entailing a very, very, very big cost. So you see that 1.56 billion, you could think, well, I need to see that in a relative term because, I mean, maybe you have a huge reserve, maybe you have huge contributions. Well, we're talking about yearly, typically, for the current system, we have 4 billion contributions, and we would have 1.56 more for the back service. So we're talking really sizable amounts of money in order to do that. But, I mean, the ambition is there. But you see that we're a long way to be there. So if you're looking at this graph, we're looking on at the percentages on the x-axis, and we're looking at the number of people on the y-axis. So we see that around 40,000 people have no pension, then most of them are actually very close to 0%, 1% around again 40,000, and then from like 3% and onwards, we see there's very few people who have contributions rates up to 30%. So there's certainly a lot of work to be done and a lot of money to be put into the system in order to attain that 3%. So, of course, given that ambition, given that project to go towards a 3%, they started to contact academics, experts, to see what should we be doing in views of this situation. And then what they said, well, let us first harmonize the system such that there's no discrimination between white and blue collar, because that's already a big step into the back service. And then let's go to the 3%. But let's slowly and provide a long transition such that we can deal with this cost. But let us first avoid the discrimination between the other ones and not attack all these new ambitions at the same time, because there's simply no money for it. Now, let us assume that we want to really go to that 3% and pay those additional premiums or contributions for the back service. What is it that we need? Well, we need people to be more literate about their funds, to know a little bit better how their funds perform, such that they are themselves also more willing to participate into the system. Of course, the employer will always be contributing more, but there's also contribution from the employee that can kind of solve part of the gap. Also, something that needs to be taken into account is that when we're contributing into the system, there is a legal minimum guarantee that needs to be provided. So, of course, those contributions that go in, they are high, but they also need to have at least 1.75% minimum return guarantee, and every year that amount is changed. So in the past it was 3.25, and that's fixed by law. So the pension fund contributions that are put into the system, also those related to the back service, need to at least perform in a particular manner. And we know that that's a difficult thing to achieve in the current low rate scenario without putting the funds in risky assets. And especially, this has become much more difficult if we're looking at inflation. Thinking of the case of Belgium and inflation, we've had on a one-year basis around 10% inflation rate at particular moments that make that sometimes real return is even negative, or certainly lower than 1.75%. So we're really in a situation where we need to increase contributions in a system that guarantees at least 1.75% when real returns are sometimes negative. So I don't know what we're going to do, but we're in a situation that is not the best case scenario, let's say. So, of course, we are already struggling to get to the 3%. Now, is 3% enough? And of course, this is just a year one very basic simulation, if you could even call this a simulation, based on different contribution rates, different life expectancies to adjust into an annuity, and to study the replacement rate that corresponds to the different contribution rates. So we see here that, of course, if I contribute 1%, I can aim at a 4% replacement rate. That's not going to be sufficient to be a proper supplementary pension. So this is the situation for most people. We've seen on average it's 3%, but most people have 1% or lower. So 3% in a good situation, around 10% replacement rate. If we really want the second pillar to be of any significance, we need to go beyond 7-8% to be able to provide 25, 28, or even larger replacement rates, because otherwise we might be discussing a lot about coverage, about minimum return guarantee, etc. If we're not providing, if we're not contributing a lot, we know we're not going to get a lot back. But we need to be able to communicate that a little bit better with contributors and with the general population. Of course, I made that simulation based on a particular scenario thing, like of 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% return. Globally, we see that if we want to have something around 20% with, say, 2% return, then we need to contribute 8 or 10% at least. So we really need to move beyond the 3%, but thus far, even 3% seems to be a challenge. Now, the second issue is the tax. And the thing is that various laws have been implemented for tax and for the different plans, either the employee, self-employed, or like employee who wants to contribute to the system, but wants to do it without their company as an intermediary. So there's all these options. So legally, you have all the options to contribute to a second pillar. And legally, there's also some kind of tax incentives for you to contribute to those pillars. So if we're looking at, in general, how much the reserve funds are, we have 85 billion euro. But again, the distribution is unequal. Most reserves by the richer contributors, low reserves by the low salaries. So I think it's easier. I don't know if it's very clear in here, but then listen to me if you don't see the numbers. If we're thinking about employees, we have, for the lowest salaries, 158 euros reserve. Of course, that's not going to be the big money that's going to save your retirement. Think of the highest percentile. We have 3.3 million euros. So we have a huge inequality in the pension fund reserves between the lowest deciles and the highest deciles. So we really have, again, this redistribution problem. We are accumulating too much in the highest earners, and they are getting high tax incentives. Now, what kind of incentives do they have? Because I'm telling you, there's fiscal incentives, but what are these kind of incentives? You've seen that Belgium, yesterday, has the highest marginal tax rate. So in some cases, almost 50% of your salary is taken for the government. So Belgium is the champion of fringe benefits, on giving you things on top of your salary. So if you earn salary, you're highly taxed, but then what the companies do is they say, well, you are highly taxed, but I'm giving you a pension fund, I'm giving you a car, I'm giving you some checks to go and buy food at the supermarket, I'm paying your transport ticket, I'm giving you a lot of extras, right? And in order to make the pension fund an attractive option for the employees, what they do is they say, look, if you would have to pay this amount of money in pure salary, you would have to pay 25% more to the government in order to give that salary. So say I want to give my employee a €1,000 yearly increase in salary, then I have to pay 250 extra to the government because I want to increase their salary by 1,000. If I don't do that and say I'd rather contribute €1,000 to the pension fund instead, I only have to pay 88 extra euros to the government. So you see 250 minus 88 is the difference of money that the government is missing because they are putting that money into a pension fund instead of salary. So those are all those kinds of fiscal incentives that exist, that there's either lower tax or no tax on the money that is put into the pension fund. So again, there's also the component that you would be able to deduct contributions as a cost, as a company, and as a self-employed. So that means that you pay less for each additional euro you pay in the pension fund, and you can deduct it as a cost. So it's really the ideal scenario for employers. If we would compare it to general investment, a general investment would be paying around 30% tax on earnings and on other things, whereas here you wouldn't be paying tax during the accumulation. So you also have like a different tax regime. You don't pay tax on accumulation, only, exempt tax, yeah, you pay it at the end, but not during, whereas the other way around, it would be TTE, you would be taxed and then you would be exempted at the end. So there's really like, they do a shift in treatment for the second pillar. Now, what is the cost of that? Then there's the Belgian Court of Auditors have calculated how much they would get extra if they would start asking for more tax or removing this tax incentive, and they say they would be getting 611 to 254, depending on the scenarios, extra million for either employees or self-employed. They would get hence a lot of extra money if they would remove this tax incentive. And the Belgian Planning Bureau, they have done this kind of like the government actuary, but with economists instead of actuaries in our case. They said that they would get 3.5 billion extra if they would remove the fiscal incentive. And why do they want to remove the fiscal incentive? Because you would all think if you remove the fiscal incentive, then you won't have the pension plan anymore. It's because of the redistribution. Because all these fiscal incentives you've seen in terms of distribution is mostly for high earners. Now, the question is, if we look globally, is it really for high earners? Yes, if we look only at the second pillar, but it mitigates if we're looking at the first pillar. Think of the formula of yesterday. We are capping benefits. So you earn a particular salary and there's a cap on the benefits, but there is no cap on the contributions. So that means that if I have an annual salary of 45,000 euros, I pay a social security contribution of 7,000, meaning that I'm under the cap of 70,000. I do not have implicit tax, and I would have a pension right of around 600 for that year, on a year basis. Now, let us go to the end of the table and say that I earn 100,000 euros and I hence pay 16,000 as a social security contribution because it's not capped, but my pension right is capped to 950. Overall, that means that I'm paying 4,600 euros in contributions for which I do not have any pension right on the first pillar. If you put these two things together and we add all the different layers that we're looking at the first and the second pillar, in the end, what seems to be a high advantage for second pillar and a high redistribution ends up, say, in 1.47%. If you look at the last column, you end up having, after taking the implicit tax of the first pillar into account, it removes to 0.65. So we need to look globally, first and second pillar, given this implicit tax, before we say there's too much incentive here, there's too much incentive there. Now let us look at different salaries. If we would earn 3,500 a month, given this implicit tax, I would end up in the negatives. So I would have a lot of incentives, and I would have a lot of fiscal credits, tax credits for the second pillar, but they would all be eaten by the first pillar implicit tax. So just a reminder that we need to look globally when we're dealing about tax incentives, because there might things that be going in the two directions. Now, the last point that I'm going to quickly talk about is lump sum versus annuity, because 99% of the people take a lump sum, but the law indicates you have always the right to get an annuity. And because it's in the law, then there's also a particular rate that needs to be used in order to transform your rights, your capital into an annuity. So the government, through the financial bodies, they say this year the annuity rate is 31. So there is, like, you go to the link and they say, okay, this is the rate that I should be using in order to transfer capital to annuities. Now the law also says that you shouldn't be annuitizing if the amount is too low, because it's just ridiculous to do so. But something that we need to keep in mind is that even though nobody does it, everyone has the right and can impose their pension fund to provide an annuity. And one thing that's very interesting is that if the pension fund doesn't have enough funds, enough reserves in order to pay you the annuity you have by law right to receive, they have to take it from their own money, from their own reserves. They have to take it from somewhere. They are legally binded to provide you that annuity. Of course, it's good that people don't know much about this, because then they would start, I mean, it's for the providers, of course, because otherwise they would start maybe asking for these products. Now, why do we also don't have annuities in Belgium? They are not fiscally attractive. It's better to get a lump sum than annuity, because remember how high was the marginal tax rate? Annuities are taxed as income. So if you get an annuity, then you are paying tax as if you would have received a salary. So not very interesting for a lot of people with the current context, to receive that. Here I'm just specifying the hypothesis that you need to use in order to calculate the annuity. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because of the sake of time, but just think that this is very controlled by the law. You have a lot of rights. People might not be aware of those rights, and they still choose a lump sum. And why? Well, there's challenges in regards of fiscal certainty, right? There's a big political risk, and then what you think you will be paying as taxes now, they might change in 5 to 10 years, and then you will have to pay more tax on your annuity. Whereas on the lump sum, you know how much you pay now, and you're released from any kind of political risk. So just before ending, I want to highlight the amounts that you would receive on the current state. 60% of the people who are going to retire soon are going to receive a monthly pension of 68 years or less. So we're talking really low numbers. This is because the plan has been implemented roughly 20 years ago. So in the future, these numbers will increase. Yet with a 1 to 2% contribution rate, of course, we're not going to have a big change in terms of adequacy. One last point that I want to raise, that imagine that we oblige annuities, that by law you need to pay out in annuities. How do we calculate that annuity? How do we take socioeconomic differences into account? I just put a graph of one of my papers where we show that differences in life expectancy could go from 15 to 23 years depending on your socioeconomic status. So this is also something that we need to take into account. We say let's pay in pensions, but in which annuity rate? Also, should we pay nominal classical annuities? Should we rather pay deferred variable annuities? This is a kind of debate that I would like to have, certainly during the coffee break, probably because of time constraints. But I would like to hear a little bit of your impressions on this, on if we do annuitization, how should we better tackle that? And this is basically the last point that I want to let sink in for us to discuss eventually later. So thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks so much. I think for the sake of time, we have one question possible. If not, we will move to the next presenter. No? Okay, so thank you, Jennifer, for this great presentation. And now let me introduce you to Abraham Hernández-Pacheco, who will talk about saving for retirement through consumption in Portugal and Europe. So, Abraham, welcome.
Thank you very much, Francisco, and thank you, everybody. Thanks to the organizers, the University of Barcelona. I'm very happy to be here with you. And I always start saying that the more I know about Social Security, the more children I have. Now I have 10. And after this conference, I might bring bad news to my wife. So we will see. I'm afraid of what's coming for what is coming for us. So I will present you something about savings for retirement. Onofre said this is the magical solution. Of course, it is not. Bad news, it is not. But it is an idea. This presentation is based on a paper I wrote along with Ana Margarida Ramos and Roberto Carcache in Portugal. And we won the first prize for research from the pensions and insurance regulator in Portugal for this work. And I hope this can add something to the discussion. And I mean, we have had the introduction during yesterday and today. Especially in Europe, we used to have very generous pay-as-you-go systems, right, for Social Security in general. However, populations are living longer. Except for me, they're having less children. And so pension costs are increasing. And this phenomenon is more pronounced in developed countries, as Europe, as it is in developing countries. We have also talked about the multi-pillar approach from the World Bank. Not long ago there was just one pillar. I mean, we would depend on the state to provide for old age pensions, and now we're talking about Pillar 0 and Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 and Pillar 3, and we've also talked about a little bit or mentioned reverse mortgages and as another pillar, and we've also talked about family as another pillar, and well, we will introduce one more pillar. This now looks like the Parthenon of pensions that we need to do something about ourselves. I also on other discussions, we were saying that, and people tend to be preoccupied about investments and where should I invest, if in equities or bonds or whatever, asset allocation, and which is the best pension plan, as you were discussing previously, all these different names, and we're worried about this. Worry about being nice to your kids to your family. That will be more important in retirement than if you had a 1% more return on your savings. But anyway, so we have a multi-pillar with many pillars coming up because they are needed. And again, we have discussed this: population aging, replacement rates, dependency ratios, and also, I mean, this is a study that was made for the Portuguese case, but it is completely, I mean, we can extrapolate this just proportionally to any European country. And it is the case that there is a deficit, and we are going through different reforms, parametric reforms, or automatic balancing mechanisms, or whatever. But at the end, governments are trying to tackle these deficits that are coming in the following years, which are obviously unsustainable in the long run. So something needs to be done. Increasing the retirement age, although it has been done, we have seen it's really very difficult and not desirable by societies, even though we are living longer and with more health, but still people want to retire at some age that they believe they can still enjoy retirement. So there's just so much we can do about retirement age. So reforms will go on the way that we will need to live, everything else being equal, with less money, unless we do something about that. And again, I mean, challenges to long-term sustainability. It would be argued, and also we have talked about that, the relationship between state pensions and private savings. And in general, we should expect a big correlation between that, and we should be expecting people to save more because they are seeing that they will have less pensions from the state, but it is not happening. I mean, in general, again, we have seen that it is not happening, that people are saving more. We have seen the Spanish case, the case in Belgium. In the UK, it's been a bit different, but in general, people are not necessarily saving more. They don't, it's like this, what happens with frogs when you start cooking them. They just don't realize they're being cooked. They just stay put, right? The water starts getting warmer, and they feel very, very nice until they are dead. So that is a bit what is happening. I mean, pensions are going down in general, and people are not necessarily saving more. There are many reasons. There are many reasons. I was going to comment on, I mean, why would I be saving if for the past, more or less, for the past 20 years, the average European that put €1 every year has no return on that, has 20 euros or even less, because in real terms, because of negative real terms, negative real rates. Probably that will change now that we start to have positive, but that's also a disincentive. And why do people instead invest in real estate? Because that is the only thing that has given some return. So sometimes we tend to think that people are irrational. They are not. They're actually pretty smart. And so we need also to look at those different things. But anyways, that's another thing. But again, these things tend to explain why people are not saving more, even though they see that pensions are going down. And here comes behavioral science. We have also talked a bit about behavioral science and how can this help on incentivizing people to save more for retirement. And of course, there are studies we've talked about, Samuelson, Benarzi, if you haven't seen that video, that TED Talk about saving for tomorrow, look at it tonight. It's really, really very good. And of course, Thaler has done a lot about this. And how can we do to make people save more? Of course, we all say, well, how can I save more? Look, there's 10% inflation last year. I need more money. I do not have money to save for now on 20 years. We don't see 20 years from now. But, okay, what if I tell you, okay, don't start today. Start tomorrow when you have a salary increase. And during the breaks, I was talking with Inma also that she's going tomorrow for a meeting where they're doing just that. Okay, let's commit to save when I have an increase. And every year I will be increasing my savings. And don't ask me to commit to a 5 or 3 or 10% savings today. I don't have that money. But what if I commit tomorrow? And that is the idea of this Save More Tomorrow program. And it has been tested, and it works. And people do enroll. It's like this auto-enrollment, and results are similar. People do commit to save tomorrow, right? It's much easier. So that is one thing. Another is this saving through consumption. This program that this is this magical solution or whatever, but okay, let's change this thing. We don't want to be taxed on my payroll, right? But if I am consuming, and I need to consume as well when I am 65 or 70 or whatever. So why don't we tie savings not to payroll, but to consumption? It might be more palatable to the people. And not only that, what if well, one is when I spend, I pay a little more, like a value-added tax. Few people really complain. I don't see, so many riots in France or elsewhere when they increase the VAT. So just increase the VAT and get that money to retirement. That might work. And also, let's use technology. And, companies and brands need to have customers in the future. So let's incentivize them to give people money to buy into the future. Right? So let's tie savings through consumption. This has been made. There are experiences here in Spain, Pensumo and some other apps that Inma told us earlier. And in Mexico, Miles for Retirement. It is a program, it's a company that has been running for 4 years now, and it has very interesting results. For example, Miles for Retirement has nowadays like 250,000 people have downloaded the app, 75,000 people doing weekly contributions to return, voluntary contributions, plus we have convinced brands and companies to give money for retirement. For example, you can go into a marketplace and buy Amazon cards or Uber cards or other cards, and you pay 100, you get your card for 100, and courtesy of Amazon or Uber or other brands, you are granted some money to your retirement account. So it's, and also, you enroll by making a commitment to save some money. And there are other behavioral economic nudging mechanisms that make people save, right? This app has like a panic button. So if we know you're spending, it's only said, well, you have been spending more than usual, why don't you contribute to your retirement? And people use it. And etc. There are some lotteries that incentivize people to save for retirement. It works. I mean, the uptake here is these things do work in practice, not only in theory, not only in experiments with university students. This is real life, and it works. Okay, so can this make a difference? And okay, it does work, but can it make a difference? And we did some numbers based upon what people have to save. I mean, their discretionary spending. This is the case for Portugal, but again, this can be just extrapolated proportionally to any other European country. So we looked at the discretionary consumption of households, and they said, and then said, well, what if people save 1% of their discretionary consumption, and let's say there's a growth in salaries or in this discretionary money that they have of 1.25% per year, which has some relation with economic projections from the European Union. And let's say a 1% interest rate, real interest rate. And okay, how much can they save, right? And it's a very easy financial projection, and they can, here in 40 years, they reach these 12,000 euros. And from here, we can estimate, okay, that if we translate that into a pension, dividing by an annuity, who nobody will take. But anyways, if we translate it theoretically to an annuity using, again, in this case, the Portuguese mortality tables, we could use any other table or whatever. If there's an investment of 1%, it seems very little. So it's a pension equivalent to less than 2.5% of the last salary or expenditure. But okay, if we go to 10%, it can make a difference. Now, of course, I cannot commit to save through consumption or payroll or whatever 10% of my salary right now. But I can do that with time. So if we go back to this Save for Tomorrow program, and I commit to increase every year, so I start with 1%, then 2% the next year, 3%. I put that on my app, and I forget about that. Then this is what we can do. So if I go 1% more 1 year, and we get the orange line, it's not that 17.5%, but it's 15%, because it's really, I mean, whatever it happens on the first 5-10 years, it's really not relevant. But after 10 years, I'm already saving 10% of my discretionary spending, which on top of the state pension and the second pillar and whatever, can be relevant and could be enough to do for the reductions that we are seeing in replacement rates. So, I mean, it is very easy, and I didn't have much time, and I could spend a lot and telling you different anecdotes about this and how things are going, but it is really simple. And especially for younger generations, which will have this problem, right, of having a lower replacement rate. They are used to technology, they embrace it, they can commit in the future, right? And, but it needs to be simple. In the case of Portugal, there is this, Onofre explained about this public public pension plan that, I mean, everybody in Portugal has a saving account with Social Security or can, I mean, contribute voluntarily to Social Security. But you need to download, or I don't know even if you need to download it, or you have to go to the Social Security and get this paper and write it and then take it on the 4th or 5th Friday of each month after 6 p.m. And that it is very difficult to really do it. So nobody does it. But if enrollment could be just download your app, put your Social Security number, you are enrolled, and start saving. Nowadays in Mexico, the easiest way to start saving voluntarily is through this app, Miles for Retirement. Literally, you download it, you put your Social Security number, your bank number, you put, I want to save 10 euros per week. You are done. You are saving. You forget about that. Right? And we have not yet implemented, but you could say, okay, I will commit. Next year, it will not be 10, it will be 20, and et cetera, et cetera. So all these behavioral aspects could be implemented in this kind of apps. And it works. Again, it's not theoretically. In practice, it is working. It is working in Spain. It is working in Mexico. Apparently, there's something in China also that they are doing this. It has been very difficult to get some more information about it. But there has also been some failed attempts here in Spain. It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, this as a business needs to get to a critical mass to be sustainable and to achieve that. But the same was with Uber, the same was with Amazon. I mean, they needed to invest a lot to get to a critical mass. But once you reach that, it just, everybody knows about it and everybody does it. And it can be not only an opportunity to alleviate the challenges we have on retirement, but it can also be a good business. So this is the idea. I hope, I was saying that we were, at some point we were about to implement this also in Spain. We had some talks with Bankia, but it was just because just before it was taken over. But it is possible.
Okay. Thank you, Abraham. I hope these miles for retirement are easy to retrieve than the aircraft miles, which I always had the impression I was losing money.
Well, here I mean, I go into my app and it says how much money you have. And you can, depending on the pension plan where you are putting your money, that has those rules. But in some cases, you can retrieve it for several reasons, as it was explained. And the idea with this, again, since it's not a huge amount, it's not really intended to be a pension, but more like a lump sum or something that helps you in retirement. But yes, and that is also, it's good that you say that. It has to be very transparent. It has to be friendly user. There's a lot of trust to be built. We cannot just build it from scratch and say, oh, here is this. You have to partner with Social Security, with financial institutions that make you think that, yes, that money is mine and I can use it when I need it. But, I mean, when is where you most need money? When you are not working anymore.
Yeah, thank you. Great ideas. I don't know, perhaps we have time for one question from the audience. Yes, please. The micro. Wait for. Yes. Okay. Two questions.
For me or? Thank you, Abraham. Do you think about any kind of incentive to try to push people to have this kind of their own savings?
Well, yes. Well, one incentive is that when we partner with brands, it doesn't cost you. So if you enroll, then you can go and buy an Amazon card, and I mean, you pay, you get your card for the full amount you paid, and Amazon is contributing for you. Or you can get tickets for the cinema, and say if they would cost 100, they cost 90, but and still you get, say, 5 or 10 euros to your retirement account. So it's with this partnership with brands that it is a higher incentive. So it is not yourself that is saving, but the society, the brands is saving with you.
At the end, someone has to pay.
Yes.
So it's the companies or
Well, for the individual, for the individual, it's free. It's a discount, as we see other discounts in general. I mean, you have some credit cards, you get a discount for this or that, or you get points that you can redeem. In this case, you are getting these points that you redeem upon retirement. We have also made some research that we need to put some other thresholds where you could get your money before retirement, because especially for younger people, saying, okay, I will have this money when I'm 60, oh yeah. But so we know we need to make it more, more proximity to that money without forgetting about this retirement. It is when you will really need it.
The first glance, it looks like the more you consume, the more you save. Yes?
Yes.
And it breaks the basic economic rule that income is equal to consumption plus saving. Yes.
Yes. Yes, we are,
So
and still it works. Yes.
It does not break this rule. If one wants to withdraw money earlier, for example, due to some serious health problems, yes, because people tend, and this is in line with, for example, life cycle hypothesis, that people need some saving to keep liquidity. So if the state offers new products within the third pillar, one of the barriers to save in the third pillar for people is the fact that the majority of programs are dedicated strictly for retirement, and you don't have option, or these options are very restricted to withdraw money earlier. What in case of this scheme?
In this particular case, the default goes to an account in Social Security, which you could withdraw with very strict, for very strict reasons. Else, it's upon retirement. But you could choose to send this money to another account where you can retrieve the money after 6 months. What we have seen is people don't look at that and just go with the default, right? But we know that we need to introduce and allow people to get that money for what you asked. I mean, I need to know that, yes, that is my money, and I could use it in case of not just an emergency, if I want to go to a trip or whatever. So yes, we still want to introduce more flexibility into that, and not being just, okay, 6 months or upon retirement. That's a very big difference. But still, I mean, people go for the default. And also what you were saying about this economic, yes, it is different, but it works. I mean, apparently but people don't want to save. Also from behavioral economic research, saving, I mean, the concept of saving is on the same cortex of, or the same part of the brain where you feel pain. So saving is painful. I mean, inherently, for some reasons I don't understand, but it is a fact. I mean, they have done research on this. On the other hand, we like to spend. I mean, spend is joyful. So let's link savings to those things we like. Why? I mean, we are now linking savings to work and save. No, let's link it to spending and having fun.
The faster you spend your salary.
The more you're saving, don't worry. Go and spend money.
Generally, the idea seems to be quite interesting.
It's appealing.
Yes, and it does not break this rule. It looks like this.
Right.
Okay, let me suggest that we continue the discussion on the coffee break. So thank you all for this great session.